I'm going to talk about Robin Hood and Little John. And based upon my evidence and my research, I do believe that Robin Hood and Little John were men of color, of a brunette type, meaning that they were dark or brown-skinned peoples. Because when you look at that time period, even the scholars from the 1800s who wrote books like The Origins of the Anglo-Saxon Race, Tribal Studies of the Old English People, majority of people in those lands of the British Isles were Aboriginals or dark-skinned people, Hamitic and Shemitic peoples. So when we look at biblical history, we know that Ham's seed was the progenitor of the dark races. So was Shem, and so was Japheth. All three were men of color. Now, we have to realize that through the intermixing or intermixture, a lot of the indigenous tribes or people of color, which we call Negroid or Negritos, were wiped out, pointing case the Tasmanian people. These were Aboriginal, swarthy, dark-skinned peoples, and they were breeded out. So history tells us that certain tribes and people were breeded out, and a lot of people that you see nowadays are hybrids. So let's delve into Mr. Robin Hood. And it states, however, the first known literary reference to Robin Hood and his men was in 1377, the 13th century. And the Sloane manuscripts in the British Museum have an account of Robin's life, which states that he was born around 1160 in Locksley, most likely Day Locksley in South Yorkshire. Another chronicler has it that he was a Wakefield man and took part in Thomas of Lancaster's rebellion in 1322. One known fact is that he was a North Country man, with his traditional hunts as an outlaw in Sherwood Forest and a coastal refuge at Robin Hood's Bay in Yorkshire. Robin Hood became a popular folk hero because of his generosity to the poor and downtrodden peasants, and his hatred to the sheriff and his verders who enforced the oppressive forest laws made him their champion. Some chroniclers date his exploits as taking place during the reign of King Edward II, but other versions say the king was Richard I, the Lionheart, Robin having fought in the Crusades alongside Lionheart before returning to England to find his lands seized by the sheriff. So now we're at the House of Names, and it states Hood is an Anglo-Saxon name. The name was originally given to a maker of hoods. The surname Hood is derived from the Old English words hode, hood, hood, hode, which all come from the Old English word hod, which means hood. So now we're back at the book, The Anglo-Saxon Race, Tribal Origins of the Old English People, page 73, and it states, where in early cemeteries, Saxon and Anglo skulls have been found representing characteristics which are clearly not of the Teutonic type. The early British inhabitants of the Bronze Age has usually been called in as an ancestor. The typical Old Teutonic skull is dolichocephalic. The skull of the British people of the Bronze Age in brachycephalic. The inference that there was a fusion of race, which means a seed line, between the Saxons and Angles and the people descending from men of the Bronze Age is easily drawn. Now we're going to go to the book Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, and we're going to cross-reference and see who the dolichocephalic, which skull they're talking about, which was found in the early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries. What race or what sea line of people were they? So now we're on page 7, Australoids. A special modification of the Negro type, the Negritos. Only the Ottomans have presented skulls approaching or exceeding an index of 80. All the Negritos, the crania of which have been examined, are dolichocephalic. But the skulls of the eastern and southern Negritos present, as I have mentioned, a remarkable approximation to the Australoids type and differ notably from the ordinary African Negroes in the great brow ridges and the pentagonal normal occipitalis. The best known and the most typical of these eastern Negritos are the inhabitants of Tasmania and of the New Caledonia, and those of the islands of Torres Straits and of New Guinea. In the outlying islands to the eastward, especially in the Fijis, the Negritos have certainly undergone a considerable intermixture with the Polynesians, and it seems probable that a similar crossing with Malays may have occurred in New Guinea. The now extinct Tasmanians, who belong to the most typical division of eastern Negritos, and it states that the skin was of a dark brown color or nearly black. So now we're at the book 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof by J.A. Rogers. Page 12, Ancient Civilizations. The Grimaldi, a Negro race, which means a seed line, lived in Europe as late as 12,000 years ago. 2 complete Grimaldi skeletons are in the Museum of Monaco near Monte Carlo. Abundant traces of their culture have been unearthed in southern and central Europe. So are Caucasians indigenous to Europe and the British Isles? No. Now when we go to the biblical terminology, you had Hamitic, Shemitic, and Japheth. Those seed lines were in Europe, North Africa, and so forth, Asia, South Asia, whatnot. So now we're at the book Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. And logically speaking, we should realize that color is not defined to any specific region. So you have Eskimos with melanin or brown or tawny skin. So it states, who were these blacks? And it says Wade. And Wade, if you look at the origin, is a Anglo-Saxon name, an Old Saxon, which the Old Saxons were swarthy, brunette, or brown or dark-skinned people. Grand Mason and some others say they represent Moors. So the etymology for the word Negro, meaning African American vernacular, the English language as spoken by U.S. blacks, is from 1704. French négrier is a 16th century borrowing from Spanish negro. Older English words were Moor and blackamoor. A Middle English word for Ethiopian in quotation marks, perhaps also a Negro generally, was blue man or blue man. We should be aware that the Ethiopians are from the Hamitic, which is progenitor, which is Ham, of the dark races, the Cushites. So when we read Amos 9 and 7, it states, "Are ye as not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, says the Lord? Have I not brought Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Kir?" So they're letting you know that the Ethiopians are very similar to the children of Israel, meaning that they're copper colored or tawny, brown, various shades, so-called black. Reading on, whom the Crusaders fought in Spain and Palestine. So now we're on page 76, Negroes and coat of arms of noble families. As we can see, many Negroes or Moors with the hoop earring. And as we can see, there's a fair-skinned Negro in the middle. When you look up fair, it has multiple or many definitions. One is handsome and beautiful. The other is light-skinned. We have to remember that the terminology of modern times, black and white, are just social constructs. For example, Steph Curry, he will be considered fair. He's not a swarthy, but more of a tawny man. Now at the bottom of the page, it says British families, top left, the Moors of Yorkshire, including Sir Thomas More, Chancellor of Henry VIII, Yorkshire Genealogist, Volume 2. So in conclusion, we should be aware that there were Moors or Negroes in Yorkshire, okay? And we know that Robin Hood fought alongside King Richard I, the Lionheart. He was a man of color, what they would call swarthy or brown or dark complexion. And as you can see, the paint's chipping off of his tomb, but he was a man of color, or as they say, he was of a brunette type or stock. Now back to Robin Hood. One certain fact is that he was a North Country man with his traditional hunts as an outlaw in Sherwood Forest, and a coastal refuge at Robin Hood's Bay in Yorkshire. One known story about Robin Hood that places him in Whitby, Yorkshire, is about him and Little John having a friendly archery contest. Both men were skilled at archery, and from the roof of the masonry, they both shot an arrow. The arrows fell at Whitby Leads, more than a mile away. Afterwards, the fields where the arrows landed were known as Robin Hood's Close and Little John's Close. So right here we have the movie Robin Hood. I believe this came out in 2018. And of course we have the Caucasian playing Robin Hood. And we have Jamie Foxx playing Little John. Now in these certain types of movies, I do believe that, they try to trick the audience. But unbeknownst to the masses, the correct portrayal of Robin Hood should have been Jamie Foxx, quote unquote, a more Anglo-Saxon origin. And as we can see, Jamie Foxx has on the blue. He's portraying the blue man, aka the Moor or the Negro. So now we're back at the book, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1. Blue man equals black man, or Morris equals Moor, or what they say, blackamoor. So we should be aware that Shakespeare, which was a so-called black man, used the word Moor as a synonym for Negro, aka the blue man. And in the British, Picts, like those of the other lands, stand out again as dark-skinned man. A complementary witness with Moraz is Gorm, found attached to the names of Highland and other chiefs and kings. This word is given in the Gaelic dictionary as signifying blue of whatever shade, also green as grass. And this recalls the fact that the indigenous tribe described by Caesar were styled both virides green and calerue blue from the woad which they stains with their body, the color of which may come under either of these headings. Accordingly, one looks again in the Gaelic dictionary, one finds that Gorman is woad. Plainly, therefore, a man who is titled Gorm is a woad-stained man. Now, we've all seen the movie Braveheart, right? That is a false depiction of the indigenous tribes that were described as woad-stained man. Jimmy Fox would be more described as a woad-stained man. Because when you make these films, we know historically they do not adhere to the evidence or the real historical events in the places and how these people look. That's why in Hollywood it's called artistic license. So most or the masses of people do not understand that museum art, movies, and television reflect what is called artistic license. It is a colloquial term or euphemism used to denote the distortion of fact. So just like in the Indiana Jones movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, most of the real historical artifacts, paintings, relics, and so forth, they're hid under the museums or the Vatican or Washington or whatever place they have these historical items, or in the hands of the rich, wealthy elites. Now, although in Gaelic or Scotland, a Negro is known as a Dwayne Dub, a black man, he is known in Gaelic of Ireland as Dwayne Gorm, a blue, green, or woad-stained man. And while the Scottish Highlands, the adjective glass is used to signify both swarthy and green. In Wales, it has the meaning of green or blue. And in the latter country, the Gaelic gorm, here spelled gorm, is equivalent to brown. What possible explanation for all this apparent confusion of terms can there be, except the patent one that a brown-skinned man and a woad-colored man were one and the same? Reading on, Morris is a word which suggests a great deal. It has this in common with the Ugarin word kara or kar, previously glanced at, that is not only signifies swarthiness of skin, but it is radically connected with a marsh or morass or carse, as it is called in Scotland. One meaning of morass in Latin is palace, and the words marsh, morass, marsh, morsh in Saxon, and moor or mur in all different forms, clearly of the original root, whatever that may be. So metaphorically, we know that the skies and seas are normally associated with fruitfulness and creation. as the ground or grass equals green fertility. The skin pigmentation are metaphorically lined with blue and green. That's why we get the term blue bloods, okay? The blue man represents the Most High in the celestial sphere. So the social status of Robin Hood was a yeoman, one who owns land and cultivates land, or to the middle ranks of servants in an English royal or noble household. Keywords, royal and noble. So now we're at the book, The Symbolisms of Heraldry, page 23, and it states, we read of the lion born as an ensign of the tribe of Judah. So like I said in a previous video, why would Caucasians or so-called white people have a lion? Usually the lions is associated with Africa or North Africa or different parts. But more specifically, those regions are people of color, which we call swarthy or tawny or brown or dark. Why would people from Central Europe associate themselves with lions? Could it be that the descendants that came from those lands migrated, intermixed with the Hamitic or Japhetic peoples, and carried their lineage with them? We know that the gold lion is the house of David. The red lion represents Zerah. The gold lion represents Perez. So with all the evidence, we should be aware that, if it was a true story, or the folklore of Robin Hood was a so-called swarthy, brown-skinned man in Little John, which means Jenkins as a surname, Little John or son of John. You know how many so-called black people in America have the last name or surname Jenkins? Most of our people believe that's a slave name given to them by the white man. As I've stated before, white man does not equal slave master, and so-called black does not mean slave. We have to get rid of these Marxist or liberal terms as they try to promote this nonsense, like our history started in 1619. So the Anglo-Saxons were of the tribe of Judah, meaning they were quote unquote so-called black, swarthy or tawny or brunette peoples, as was King Richard I, the Lionheart. So right here we have the book Hebrewisms of West Africa by Joseph J. Williams. Now, as we can read at the bottom, it says the English themselves are descended from the 12 tribes of Israel, denoting that the Anglo-Saxons knew who they were. They were from the northern kingdom, or Ephraim. So now we're going to go to Hosea 9:16-17. Ephraim is smitten, the root is dried up, they shall bear no fruit, yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. My God will cast them away, because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wanderers among the nations. As we can see from the chart, Manasseh and Ephraim, the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, taken into Syria captivity, 2 Kings chapter 18:11. 200,000, 150 of Judah taken into Syria, 2 Kings 18:13. So now we're back at Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, page 121. The Danes then were like the Moors, which meaning Negroes, were black. Like them too were the Picts, as more than one eminent writer has proved. The title of Gorm Wodestein is not confined to Highland genealogies. It was the actual name of a grim, old pagan Dane who ruled over Denmark in the earlier part of the 10th century, and the word survived lately, that provenance of the black Gentiles. And like I stated before, the Gentiles of the New Testament were Israelites of the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, or Ephraim. Reading on, whether as Danes or as Picts, they were a swarthy, piratical race, meaning pirates. But that will conclude this video. I know I kind of went off on a tangent on different topics, but the main point I was trying to make in this video was that the Anglo-Saxons were of the Shemitic or Hebrewic line. Therefore, they were brunette peoples. So them being brunette peoples or people of color, swarthy or tawny, it would make more sense that Robin Hood and Little John were both men of color, as King Richard the First, the Lionheart, and along a lot of the kings of Europe that they've whitewashed through typification or iconoclasm.